Well, it's a hard rain, it's a purple rain. Touch the levee and leaves a stain. I'm leaving this
Hey everybody,
town
it's Mark
without
Finkelpearl, and
regret.
there he is, Jeffrey Himes. Welcome back to Hard Rain and Pink Cadillacs. Today's a big day in so much as, it's here at our show, the first time we've talked to a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Jorma Kaukonen, founding member of the Jefferson Airplane. He was inducted into the Rock Hall in 1996. And of course, Jorma is also known for his long collaboration with his childhood friend, Jack Cassidy, the bass player in the Jefferson Airplane, and that is called Hot Tuna. So really excited to have him on the show. Jeffrey, what are your impressions of Jorma Kaukonen, and why should people pay attention to this gentleman?
Well, what's interesting about Jorma is that he comes out of this sort of country blues explosion in the early 60s, like Dave Van Ronk and John Fahey and David Bromberg. And he ends up in this psychedelic rock band, Marty Balin and Ray Slick wailing away, and him, Paul Kantner, playing electric guitars. But you can always hear that country blues influence in there, and it's that influence that gives that band some weight that it really needed. So I'm really eager to hear him talk about both those days and what he's doing now.
Yeah, great. Here is the Hard Rain and Pink Cadillacs conversation with Jorma Kaukonen. Jorma, welcome to Hard Rain and Pink Cadillacs. It's an honor to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for inviting me. Appreciate it.
As we record this, we're only 3 days away from the passing of Bob Weir. He left this planet 3 days ago. You knew Bob a long time. You guys were pals forever. And I'm wondering how you're feeling about it, what you're feeling about it, and how you feel Bob will be remembered in American music.
Well, I guess the first thing, and at my age, we start to lose a lot of people that we know, but this really hit close to home for us. I guess the most important thing I would start out by saying is Bob and I were young together, and at our collective age, that means a lot. That being said, he was just always such an interesting guy, gosh, I mean, he was just so he was just so undeniably curious about everything. I remember when he was younger, we used to call him bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I'm not sure I would have called him that as a more adult human being, but I mean, just an incredible, talented guy. I'd call him a biophile, a lover of life. He just loved everything, And in the course of his life, he managed to do almost everything.
Yeah, he certainly did. We wanted to. You've been interviewed a million times, and we wanted to try and start this interview a little bit differently, maybe than you're used to. And I found this photo. It's a Jim Marshall photo, and it's you, Jerry, Jack, and Pigpen in Golden Gate Park in 1967. I don't know if you've seen this photo recently, but do you remember? Now, of course, the cliche is if you can remember the 60s, you weren't really there. But I'm wondering what you recall about this and how it makes you feel to see a photo like that these days.
I mean, it's a window in time, obviously, and two of the things I think about is that elkskin shirt that I'm wearing that I got at Sidereal Time in L.A. It was so uncomfortable, but fashion is a cruel mistress, and we were into the whole Native American thing there for a while. And the other thing is that I was really into photography back in those days, which for somebody who didn't have a dark room, it could be an expensive thing. But you'll notice I think it's a Pentax or something, I don't know, but I've got the camera in hand, and there we are, just
Yeah.
Goldgate Park, feeling pretty darn good about ourselves.
All flipping the middle finger to the camera.
Always. You couldn't do a photo shoot with Jim Marshall and not at least have one flipping the bird picture.
What do you remember about that guy? He was notoriously prickly, right?
Yeah, for some reason, Jim really liked me. We got along well. He's mercurial, I think, is the word that I would use. He was a really mercurial guy, incredibly talented, unbelievably brash. Most of us have seen all the pictures that he did from the '60s in San Francisco, but you need to, if you haven't seen his civil rights work, you got to get check that out too.
Can I
Hmm.
ask you a question,
Sure.
Norman? That um, for obviously Bob was often never maybe never got his full due because of Jerry's enormous presence, but there's something about the relationship between two guitarists in a rock and roll band, whether it's you and Paul, or uh, Jerry
Sure.
and Bob, or George and Harrison and John Lennon, or Keith Richards and Brian Jones, where the roles of being a rhythm guitarist and a lead guitarist somehow get blurred. And I was wondering if you could talk maybe a little bit about what that relationship was like for Bob and Jerry, and then what it was like for you and Paul.
Yeah. So, um, Bob was such a cerebral guy, and I think that manifests itself in the way he played the guitar. Nobody played the guitar the way he did. I mean, if you look at his chord shapes, people write about this all the time, but it's really true. His chord shapes, the stuff he did with his right hand. I mean, he absolutely architected that position. And in my humble opinion, Jerry, obviously an unbelievable musician, uh, had an incredible springboard, to do all kinds of fancy diving tricks, as a result of what Bob did. Um, in the era in which we grew up, came of age, rock and roll era, the rhythm guitar player was sort of maligned on some level. Oh, he's a rhythm guitar player. But if you listen to a band like the Dead or the Jefferson Airplane, the band would not have sounded the same had it not been for the rhythm section, and the rhythm guitar player is a part of that. I mean, everything that the ability that I had to learn how to solo with the Jefferson Airplane is a direct result of the way Paul and Jack and Spencer played, and gave me, a blank canvas to paint pictures on, and that's just really the way it is. So yeah, it's not as heroic. Bob was never, I don't remember Bob making guitar faces or any of that kind of stuff, but he sure made some great music.
Can you talk a little bit about, what was about the rhythm section in the airplane that made the airplane sound that way, and what the rhythm section in the Dead did that would made them sound that way?
Sure, I think it has to. I mean, if you get a chance to listen to where the members of the airplane came from, and sad to say, there's not a lot of recordings of that kind of stuff because that's not the way it was back then. But Paul as a player, I don't think Paul ever played an upstroke with his pick in his life. I mean, when you see him on people have shot videos and the whatever Woodstock, but watch him play, it's almost all downstrokes. And that percussive thing, I mean, that's just the sound of the band, really.
Mhm.
People go, yeah, you did all this kind of stuff. I couldn't have done any of that stuff had it not been for Paul. And I think the same thing is true of the Dead too. Phil Lesh, another extremely idiosyncratic bass player with a deep feeling of groove. I mean, he never lost the groove either, but he wasn't in that era a traditional bass player.
Hmm. And what about Jack's bass playing? How would you
Same
characterize that?
same thing. I mean, Jack, when we were in high school and stuff, and after I left and Jack was playing in bands, he was playing guitar, and he started playing the bass because Danny Gadden had a gig that he needed a bass player, and Jack said, "I'm a guitar player," and I remember that Jack told me, Danny said, "It's got four strings. How hard could it be?" And he went to and then he realized that there's dozens of great guitar players and not many bass players, so he just stuck with the bass. But as a result of coming from the guitar, Jack's bass playing is very lyrical. But also as a result of him playing in so many rhythm and blues bands when he was a kid, his groove is rock solid.
And the other thing that's interesting too is that uh, you know the the Dead and Jefferson Airplane, in the popular opinion, are thought of these sort of far out psychedelic bands, but they're both rooted in blues and you know,
Yeah,
hillbilly music,
yeah,
and
agreed.
you know, especially you and Jerry, you know, both, you know,
Right.
started out there and then evolved into this other kind of music.
And
And
the other thing
why
too
is
is, I
that?
mean,
Why are those origins important to what happened?
mm, I guess at some point we could probably have an endless but utterly inconsequential discussion about what is psychedelic music. I mean, it is true that we made noises with the guitars and there's feedback and stuff like that, but you know, that's also part of the vocabulary today that I don't think anybody would say, well, that really sounds psychedelic. I mean, I don't know what is to be psychedelic.
Mhm.
I think what was interesting for both of those bands, the Airplane and our band, was that we had, in spite of the fact that we're all springing from a more traditional background, most of us were folkies. Grace wasn't, but the rest of the people in the band, except for Spencer, pretty much were. Um, was that we were always given an opportunity to play it the way we wanted to play it. Um, and so when somebody brought a song to the Airplane, I don't know how the Dead functioned in this way too, but usually it would be Paul, probably Marty and Grace. They'd work something out, then they bring it to rehearsal, and we just start to flush things out. So for our band, certainly it absolutely sprung from an acoustic 12-string guitar player, you know, who basically hammered the shit out of a 12-string guitar, and that was his sound.
Last
And
year, you
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, no, no. Well, actually, to extend that for a moment and
Okay.
talk about the psychedelic sound, to what degree in the earliest days of the Airplane were you using wah-wah pedals and really trying to model the sound with any sort of technology like that that was available at
Right,
the time? Fuzz boxes.
right. So you know, people occasionally ask me, when you first started with the Jefferson Airplane, what kind of pedals did you use? And I said none because we didn't have any. I think the first pedal that I got was a Vox Crybaby made by that Italian company, the Thomas Organ Company. I still have four of those, and they sound different than the modern ones. Anyway, and I got those because uh, I heard Clapton use one, and I loved what he did with it. I mean, you heard a lot of these wah wah players in that time, and they're basically keeping time with the pedal, you know, so the wah 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 had to do with whatever the rhythm of the song was. But he was actually using it to shape notes, and I like that too. I mean, like guitar players will know exactly what I mean. Like for example, you've got your guitar, you're bending a note, and as you bend a note, you swell the wah wah pedal forward. It just sounds like it's taking off to interstellar space or something.
Mhm.
Yeah, indeed. You know, one of the things that has been a hallmark of your career is your belief and in guitar education. And I'm wondering, I mean, this one, you've probably seen this one too. It's out there on the internet, right? It's your phone number.
Yeah,
You could take guitar lessons from Jerry Kaukonen or
that's
Jerry
me.
Garcia. Um, I don't know whatever happened to John Massey, Jeff Levin, and Paul Sussman, but this was obviously shortly after you moved to the Bay Area.
It was, yeah.
You were tell us about that era, and then as you grew in stature, and
Right.
as your career advanced, you continued to do that. You
Right.
did that with homespun videos, all leading up to Fur Peace Ranch. Tell us about your desire, your belief in guitar education, or was it
Sure.
just a way to make a few extra bucks?
Well, a little of both. First of all, one of my friends that still lives in the South Bay area, I think Paul Sussman is still around. The other people I don't know about. But anyhow, so when I moved to California, Cantor was already teaching at the Benner Music Company, and uh, I wasn't making any money playing gigs. I was playing hoots all the time, but you didn't get paid for doing that. And so Paul said, "Well, I'm teaching at this music store. Why don't you teach guitar?" And I remember, I don't know if I said it this way, but I probably did. Well, what am I going to teach? And I'm sure he said, "How about something you know?" You know, so I started to teach, and I because I was playing like little minuscule gigs and hoots all the time. I kind of had a captive people that wanted to learn how to play. And I discovered when I got into it that I really enjoyed showing people how to do stuff. And even at an early age, I realized that the ability to articulate what I was doing in an understandable way was going to make me a better player, and I still feel that way today.
So a lot of people talk about, teaching music is that, you know, there are, there are things that you can teach and things you can't teach. And it's wondering if you,
Yeah.
after doing it for so long, if you could sort of
Sure.
elucidate that distinction.
Yeah, that's a tough one. So I'm getting ready to go to California in a couple weeks, and I've got some workshops on the road, and we're still doing that. And I've noticed that at my age today, most of the people that come to there's a point to this story here. Most of the people that come to take lessons from me tend to be it's the demography that favors the male player, but there's some ladies that come and play also. But most of the guys, uh, they just kind of want to assume that space and time that the music occupied. Um, or maybe they just want to learn a song that I can teach them, etc. But I think that what I wanted to do when I started to teach was to actually teach people how to play an instrument and take it beyond that. I've never thought about trying to create mini me's. I mean, obviously, you can only teach what it is that you know, but uh, but my thrust has always been, look, here's what's worked for me. It may not work for you. And one of the cool things about the guitar, from a playing and a teaching point of view, is there's a lot of ways to skin that cat. You know, I mean, if you watch guitar players, and now people playing all these odd tunings that probably they didn't do when I was a kid and stuff like that. But for me, I can look at the left hand of somebody playing a standard tuning, which is what I play in almost all the time, and it's recognizable what they're doing almost immediately. But watching the right hand, that's where the magic happens. And Roy Bookbinder, a great blues guitar player, said, "Your left hand is what you know, but your right hand is who you are." And I totally believe in that. So I guess when I'm teaching, I can say, look, I can only show you what it is that I'm doing. I'm a three finger picker, and I tend to support my hand, and et cetera, et cetera. So as a result, in my music, there was a lot of triplet figures because of the obvious things. If you play like a classical player with all five fingers, I think it frees you rhythmically in a lot of other ways. But again, there's a lot of ways to skin this cat.
There's also a distinction between the technical things of, putting your fingers in the right place at the right time and, you know, what people call creativity or
Sure.
originality.
I think there's a lot of levels of creativity. One of which is what each individual brings to the table as an artist. You know, I mean, everybody doesn't spring from a blues background as I pretty much did, even though I'm not a strict blues player. I mean, you bring to the table what you've got. Now, what you're going to do with it, that's where the artistry comes in. And that's something I think that you can't script and you can't define. And given the time and space to do something, almost everybody will come up with something almost magical. Some people are more magical than others, but I mean, without having the pressure of having to sound like John Lennon or whoever happens to be your magic guy, your soul will shine through. That's what I'm trying to say.
Jorma, there's, for a casual fan who doesn't go too deep on the history, it's very easy to think that Hot Tuna was an offshoot band of the Airplane, and
Right.
that's really not true. You and Jack were playing together before either of you ever moved
Sure.
to California, and the stuff that you released last year on Reno Road was recorded in 1960 while you were still at Antioch. That was really sort of proto Hot Tuna in a way. And my
Absolutely.
question is, when you got to San Francisco and you joined the Airplane, was there any sense that, oh, I'm selling out to play this commercial music, or how did you feel about segueing into something that was completely apart from what you had been doing on acoustic guitar?
I think that had the airplane happened 6 months before it did, that I probably would have offended myself by not being a thing. I mean, it's so funny to think about today, really. I mean, but yeah, I mean, when you're, in your early 20s and stuff like that, and just discovering all the stuff, it's easy to be full of yourself. But I don't think I had any idea what was going to happen. But And I've told this story a million times, but I need to tell it again. So I was sort of dismissive of the pop rock music of that time, before the airplane happened and all that stuff. And it was before I heard Cream and all those other inventive bands that were in a direction that I've wanted to go myself later. But I have this friend, Steve Mann. He's a great guitar player from LA, passed away a number of years ago. If you can ever get a copy of Steve Mann's Straight Life rare vinyl or Steve live at the Ash Grove, you got to check it out. Anyway, so Steve and I, we were living together with my ex-wife and a couple other people. We had this little commune going, and Steve brought some acid by. Now I'd smoked a little pot back then. I mean, it was probably such dirt weed that the kids at college in this college town where I live would have thought, "What is this stuff?" They would have thrown it out. Kids today don't know what seeds and stems are, but that's another story altogether. Anyway, so Steve had some acid. We dropped acid. He didn't tell me what it was going to do. He didn't say how long it was going to last, and it did what acid does, and at some point, and I don't recommend this, people that want to take a trip, I don't recommend driving your car, but it seemed to be a good idea at the time. And one of the gals that shared the house with us had this Volkswagen Bug, and we piled about 5 people into the Bug and drove around through the mountains of the South Bay, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, we wound up on 101 as the sun is coming up, still tripping. It's rush hour. I'm driving this Volkswagen Bug, and the only thing I can see in my rearview mirror is the grill of this 18-wheeler. And this is starting to freak me out a little bit. But at that moment, I turned the radio on. This is an absolutely true story. And George Harrison's guitar solo for She's a Woman came on. And in that moment, I got it. That was a grand epiphany for me.
Wow.
And
So
what did that getting it enable you to do moving
Well, all
forward?
of a sudden, I started to listen to people playing the electric guitar that weren't old blues players.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it
Yeah.
just opened my eyes to the fact that there was a lot of cool stuff going on, and I'd been ignoring it.
Yeah. Wow. What was the level of ambition in the early days of the airplane? Did you guys really set out to try and make huge hits?
I I think Paul did. I think Marty did. Grace, well, we'd have to talk to Grace. I'm not here to speak for Grace, but I think both of them did. But for me, I think what I was thinking about really was just being able to support myself as a musician, which I've been doing pretty well as a solo artist. It seemed like it was going to be fun, looked like I was going to be moving to a city, and it looked like when we started at the Matrix, we were kind of the house band. I mean, for all I knew, I could have been there for the next 30 years and then retired and opened a music store or something like that.
Yeah, that's funny.
But you come from, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you come from DC to California. You're sort of a Gary Davis, Mississippi John Hurt kind of guy,
Yeah.
and why didn't you just continue doing that like a Dave Van Ronk or John Fahey did?
I got seduced by the whole thing, plain and
Uh,
simple.
uh,
And it just seemed like it was a good idea, and I remember because I had this beautiful '37 Gibson L5, all maple, and I noticed in one of those other pictures, I noticed it looked like a blackface amp of some was back then. Anyway, I had an old early '50s Fender amp, and that's what I took to the first airplane rehearsals. Now I was stupid because I sold the whole rig for $250, but that's another story altogether. But it was a process. It was a process, and the next electric guitar that I got after that uh, was the Rickenbacker 12-string. Paul insisted I get one because McGuinn had one, and I remember that I cashed in some Israeli bonds that my grandmother had put away for me when I was a kid and bought that guitar with those.
you mentioned
Amazing.
you mentioned Jim / Roger McGuinn. We've been talking a lot about the Dead, and
Right.
how did the Birds figure into this? I know that Good Shepherd you sort of got from Roger, right?
No, I got that from Roger Perkins.
Oh, Roger Perkins. Okay,
That's another story. But
that's another story. Okay,
yeah, so Cantor knew Crosby, and they lived in a commune for a while down in Venice Beach, and and David came up and played the little folky places we all did, et cetera, et cetera. But then the Byrds started out, and they had their hit with Tambourine Man. And I remember they're playing. They opened a show for the Rolling Stones at the San Jose Civic, and my ex-wife and I went and saw the show. And I remember they just knocked my socks off. That was, and the other thing, just from a guitar geeky point of view, because Roger slash Jim, uh, he used a lot of different tunings. Like in today's age, a band of that stature would have like 10 guitars, and a guitar guy would hand them each guitar and a cushion,
Right.
Here's a guitar in your C13 flat 9 tuning or whatever. Uh, but he put that Rick and all these different tunings during the show, and it was always in tune. And that, as a guitar geek, that amazed me.
Let me show you another one here. This is another Jim Marshall. This says Fillmore, October 9, 1966. It's you, Jerry, and Mike Bloomfield between you.
Yep. Look
Any
at that.
any memories of that day?
Well, not specifically,
that?
but there's memories of that time. Boy, look at
Yeah.
that hair. Uh,
Yeah, you want to see that again?
amazing.
Prince
Yeah,
Valiant.
so when the Butterfield Blues Band came to town, um, but as things were just beginning to get going with the airplane, I lived at a third floor walk up, a shotgun apartment in the Western Addition on Divisadero Street. It
Yeah.
would be unaffordable to rent there today, but back then it was like $80 a month. And so when the Butterfield Blues Band came, they didn't have the money or places to stay, and so Bill Graham asked me if I'd put Mike Bloomfield and his wife up, and I said absolutely. If they don't mind sharing a 3-room apartment, we're good with that. So they came over, and Mike was, I'm still, a novice electric guitar player, and being amazed by what Mike was doing with the band, I immediately sat down with him, and he showed me how to bend strings and do all that kind of stuff that the 13-year-olds take for granted today.
Uh-huh.
You
But all these bands we're talking about were taking that sort of folk blues movement of the late 50s and 60s and transforming it, but they weren't abandoning it. They were, pushing it into a new kind of sonic space. But
No, I
and
mean,
why was
and
that?
again,
Why was that? There was more continuity than I think most people realize.
Agreed. And in a band like Jefferson Airplane, where I certainly would have been, pretty much consumed with blues as I saw it at that time. Paul Kantner, not so at all. It was a perfect storm for bringing these disparate characters together to actually create whatever you want to call the kind of music we played.
Go ahead, Jeff.
And Jack was a blues head like you were. Is that fair to say?
No, Jack actually, he started out, he was much more interested in playing jazz.
Oh, okay.
But I don't think he's ever played in a jazz band, but that's what he listened to. Like Scotty LaFaro was one of his go-to guys.
Yeah.
Scotty died way too young, but that's another story.
Right.
Yeah. So, but Jack was working as a full-time musician when he was still in high school, and he was playing in rhythm and blues bands. So he got schooled early on in being rock solid, and at the same time, his lyrical vision, because of the music that he personally liked to listen to, turned him into the Jack that we know today. I'm not sure that the bands he played with, because they were all like cover show bands back in those days. The guys all wore tuxedos, and there was like a bunch, that's doing steps and all that kind of stuff. I doubt whether one of those bands would have encouraged Jack to be the Jack that we know, but he certainly cut his teeth, being a rock solid bass player, playing that kind of music, and then adding his own lyrical content to it.
Yeah, and R&B is another kind of roots music in a sense.
It is, yeah.
Jorma, you're well known for having embraced the Gibson 345 in the airplane. How did you come to that guitar? And it seems like a lot of the guitars you had back then you don't have anymore. Is there anything in your collection that still goes back to those days?
Yeah, well, I have more guitars than I need, but I'm not really a collector. I have my first 1958 J50. I still have that one.
Mhm.
Excuse me. All the airplane guitars are gone. I have a couple of the Hot Tuna Strats left over.
Mhm.
Um, I never, I never really saw myself as a collector, but uh, but guitars are fun to own. Uh, what kind of amp is that back there before
Oh, well, are you looking at, there are two of
the
them. There's a Boogie. It's
the boogie, the
basically
other one?
a Mark One, but it's a reissue from about 1990. And the other one is a Music Man 112 from about 1978.
Nice, very
And
nice.
I love Music Man amps. I think
I'll
that
bet.
they punch above their weight.
Yep.
They're still not very expensive. You can get a
I,
really good Music Man with the original speaker for about $600, and before the pandemic, they were at $350.
right.
And
Very nice.
I really love Music Mans.
Yeah, nice. Very nice. Well, we
We,
needed to do that. I'm glad we got that out of the way there.
That's good.
Wait a minute.
All
Where
the
were we
guitar
before I?
players who watch our show will enjoy that moment.
Yeah. Where were we before I
Well, we were
digress?
talking about the
Oh, I
345
remember. Yeah.
too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the first guitar I had the Rickenbacker 12 string, and and then because I realized that I was going to need a 6 string guitar also, I had just seen the Loving Spoonful playing. I don't think it was a topless joint, but it was a bar next to a topless joint down in North Beach. They had their big hit, but they were playing bars just like we all did.
Yeah.
And Zalyanovsky had that Guild Thunderbird. And I loved what he was doing, and I thought the guitar looked slicker than snot. And so I got one. And I remember that one of the things about that guitar, I don't know if you've ever played one, but if you look at ones in pictures, there's lots of switches and stuff like that on it.
Hmm. Hmm.
And they're like two complete sets of electronics. It's almost like a jazz master in some way. But
Right.
one of the totally forgettable features of it is there's one little toggle switch that if you hit it, it shuts the guitar off in its
Yeah. Like a
entirety.
kill switch.
It's totally a kill switch. So yeah, so I had that, and after I embarrassed myself by killing it on stage several times, I realized I had to get something else. So I had recently just seen B.B. King, Bobby Blue Blend, and Johnny Talbot, The Things, at the Fillmore before it became a white dance hall, and Johnny was playing, or rather, BB was playing a 355, and I
Hmm.
just loved the way that thing looked. And so I had no idea about the Veritone switch or any of this stuff. I just thought it looked cool. So I went down, and it's the first thing I ever financed, and I financed one at Sherman and Clay, and it actually turned out to be the guitar that I really learned how to play electric guitar on. Now it is true that in the beginning I used the Veritone when we recorded and stuff, but I soon came to realize that the Veritone was shitty, 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 and BB. And so the BB setting was the number one setting was really the go-to thing. But the fact that it was a stereo guitar also allowed me to use two amps and ultimately 4 amps in the airplane, where I had one for the bridge pickup and one for the neck pickup.
Amazing.
can we talk a little bit about these new records you've put out, the Reno Road and the Wabash Avenue, and
Sure.
what the what the intention at the time of doing these records was, and why you're bringing them out now.
Well, Reno Road was, Jack had all these tapes of the stuff that I did before I went out to California. And
Mhm.
when we, he gave them to a friend of ours that archives that kind of stuff so we could get a clean pass. It was just like a window in time for me to see where I was at that time and where I was going. That's
And
what
this,
that thing
okay,
was
and
all
this
about.
was you were still in college, 1960.
Yeah,
Reno Road is the street in D.C., correct?
it's a street that Jack lived on.
Uh,
Uh, and that was it. What happened was I was getting ready to. I just finished an Antioch summer job at this spinal cord damage hospital in New York. It was the summer of 1960, and that's where I was actually you know, hanging out with Ian and sitting at the feet of all these great players and stuff like that that were still alive back then. And I was getting ready to. I didn't get kicked out of Antioch, but I wasn't encouraged to come back. My grades weren't really. They weren't interested in me as a scholastic master. So my dad was stationed in the Philippines. I went back to the Philippines and went to a Jesuit school there for a year. And on my way to go there, I stopped by D.C. and I was leaving a bunch of stuff with my grandparents who lived in D.C. And Jack said, what have you been up to? And I said, let me show you. And he said, let me tape it.
And that was the Wallen sack that Jack told me he still has.
I've seen that tape recorder myself. Now, it is true also, he actually has two of them because he got one that had been refurbished. I don't think he messed with the original, but he does, yes, he has the original one. It probably works too, who knows?
And he's on those tracks. He's accompanying you, right? Is it
No,
just you
it,
solo? It's
it's
just
just
you.
me solo.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
Jack is the producer and the engineer. He was holding the microphone.
And then what
Right.
about Wabash Avenue?
So Wabash Avenue, right, the last house that I had in San Jose before I moved to San Francisco to be with the airplane was a 75 and a half Wabash Avenue. And at those days, it was I said it was 75 and a half because there were two little houses that were like really two rooms, with like a kitchen in the middle and a sort of a living room and a bedroom. That was it. And there were two of those with a driveway in between. And that's where I was living when we recorded those tapes. Now, what happened is that before the airplane thing started to seduce me into the evil world of rock and roll, um, I was going to do this live album, and Norm Benner, that owned the Benner Music Company, put up some money to produce it, and we had this a guy that had a 15 IPS tape recorder and all this kind of stuff. We were very high tech at that moment, and so I recorded. I think one of the nights might have been at the off stage, but the others were at a club called the Shelter, and we were going to make a record, and I was going to release it, and that was going to be the next step in my career, and I would have continued doing what I was doing. But uh, in that August, when all this happened, I got the call for the airplane. As soon as that ball started rolling, I completely forgot about Wabash Avenue. And had I not, where the original tapes are, who knows? The tapes that we made those from were the safety copies that we made and wrapped up in brown paper and took it to the post office and had all these stamps, stuff like that, the poor man's copyright. So it had a date on it, and those tapes lay unopened for over half a century. And my wife and I moved from the farm we had down in the country up to this little college town called Athens, where we live now. And we were going through boxes and throwing away stuff. Filled up a 30-foot dumpster, by the way, very cathartic. But
Wow.
one of the things that didn't make that was, what's this? She said, and I went, well, I forgot all about that. And as a result of me not throwing that out, we're having this
So,
conversation.
so why is Reverend Gary Davis three of the tracks on that record, and why was he such a touchstone at that point?
Well, he's the guy. He was. Well, Ian Buchanan was my gateway. We can geek out about this a little bit here. So Reverend Davis, an absolute genius as a musician, whose gateway to our ears happened to be the guitar. Really interesting player. Only played with two fingers of his right hand. How do you make all that music with two fingers? As a result of that, his music is very percussive. But anyway, when I first heard Ian play at Antioch, I just learned a couple things from Ian, and he turned me on to the Reverend. And he was certainly very influential. I learned a bunch of Reverend Davis songs. Um, but I realized that I didn't want to emulate him. It wasn't like, I'm going to be myself. I don't need to copy it. It wasn't like that. It just didn't make sense to me to play with two fingers when I could play with three.
Mm.
So that's just the route that I took. But a lot of the Reverend Davis chords, Bob Weir took lessons from Reverend Davis also. And even though Bob was not a fingerpicker in that way, if you look at the way he does Samson and Delilah, guitar players that have seen the Reverend play Samson and Delilah will recognize Reverend's chord shapes. Very, very different. Anyway, Weir, really interesting guy for doing that. But in any case, so the music of the Reverend, I mean, just sonically, it was just an earworm for me. I just couldn't get it out, and so I think the two traditional, quote unquote traditional guys that were influential to me in that time were the Reverend more than anybody else in some ways, and Ian, of course, even more than the Reverend, and Brownie McGee. And if you're getting into that stuff, Brownie McGee has a 10-inch record on Folkways with 8 songs on it, simply called Brownie McGee. That's, if you like that kind of stuff, you got to get it.
So you took lessons from the Reverend
I
at his
never
house?
did. I
Oh, you
never took
didn't.
lessons.
Okay.
I didn't
All right.
have to. I knew Ian,
So
and
Tell us about Ian. What
so
his
Ian,
story is.
it's an unfortunate story. Ian was in his time was one of the big dogs. You know, he was a contemporary of Dave Van Ronks, and his technique was incredible. Yeah, I think that Snooks Eaglin was his muse on some level. Well, no, I think no. Lonnie Johnson, take that back. Lonnie Johnson was Ian's muse, but he was just a monstrous guitar player. But he studied a lot of guys, knew a lot of stuff, and his take, and he was friends with the Reverend. Like he'd drive the Reverend to go to shows and this and that, and so the stuff that I was interested in was not only stuff that I learned from Ian, that was Ian's music, but was his take on the Reverend also. I learned the Reverend actually from Ian. In any case, so he was this guy. He his mother was the editor of Parents Magazine for a while. There was money in his family. He didn't need to work for a living, uh, and if he would go to get a gig in New York, and he got a lot of gigs, and people didn't listen, he'd just get up and walk away because he just didn't give a shit. You know, if somebody wanted to listen, great. If they didn't, he didn't care. He didn't need the money. It didn't matter to him.
And
Uh,
was he your age or older?
he was a couple years older than me.
Okay.
He was a couple years older than me,
And he was
and
based in New York City, or
he was, yeah. He grew up where all the great blues players grow up, Forest Hills.
So you met him when you were doing the internship.
No, I
Is
met
that
him in
right?
Antioch. I wound up the last quarter on campus quarter. I wound up in an off-campus house with him. They're mostly musicians and the stuff. My roommate was a guy named Steve Richmond, whose brother was Fritz Richmond, the jug player in the Queskin jug band. Yeah,
And drug
sorry about
ban.
that.
Wow. So, but Bob Weir did take lessons from the Reverend, and somehow, do you remember how they connected?
I don't know how that connected, but that certainly says a lot about Bob. When Bob wanted to learn about the Reverend, he went to the source. You know, I just got an email from a friend of mine that lives in Dayton that was talking about he wanted to write something. He was talking about Jerry taking lessons to the Reverend. I immediately texted him back. You've got that absolutely wrong. Jerry never took lessons to the Reverend, but Bob did. And if you look at the Dead's version, as I've said before, of Samson and Delilah, Bob is using those Reverend chord shapes.
I remember somebody told me that they took lessons from Reverend Gary, and they'd be down in the basement playing these dirty blues songs, and the Reverend's wife would come down halfway down the stairs to check on things, but they would immediately switch to gospel,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
she would go back upstairs and they go back to the blues. So
yeah. Bookbinder told me that's true.
Amazing. Well, Yorma, we're coming up toward the end of the hour with you, but you know, one of the reasons why you're so inspiring is because you just turned 85 years old about six
Did.
weeks ago, and you still, are not resting on any laurels, although you have many, and you are still planning big things, which is really inspiring. I mean, your first book, Been So Long, came out a few years ago,
Yeah,
and I think was on the bestseller list, and now you're planning a new book.
I
Tell us
am.
about that and tell us about what 2026 is going to bring for you.
So, I mean, as far as the book is concerned, you know, Chris Smithers said this about writing songs, but I'm going to paraphrase it. I hate writing books, but I really like having written books. I mean, just getting off my ass to make it start happening. That's the tough thing. And I've just started. I just started. Actually, started a couple of days ago. And when I flesh it out a little bit, I'll probably do an outline and see where I'm going to go with this thing. But so yeah, that's something I want to work on this coming year, and I'm not sure what my take is. I mean, I don't have another 60 or 70 years to talk about, so we'll see where that goes. But I'm very fortunate because I'm still better than reasonably healthy, and I still love touring and I still love the guitar. And the guitar, it's not like, well, now that I've learned how to play the guitar, what am I going to do now? It's not like that, as you know. It's always something new. And I like hanging out with other players. I like sharing what I know, and I like learning what they know. And it's a never-ending process. Now, because I'm not doing electric band stuff now, it's been a while since I've picked up an electric guitar, but I didn't get rid of them. So you never know when that's going to pop up.
Well,
But,
those Hot Tuner Stratocasters sound exciting.
well, listen, I wish I still had those. That American flag one, that was a 57.
Wow.
No, back in those days, we didn't know what a vintage guitar was. They were just old guitars.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I let that go. I
Before
let that
before we
go.
let you go, can you talk a little bit about your camp and why
Sure.
why that's an environment that's different than a lesson?
Okay.
Uh,
Well, first of all, the camp has been gone for a couple years now.
oh, okay.
So when and we had it for over 20 years. We had a really good run with it. But I'll talk the environment to create an environment to be able to create an environment surrounded by like-minded people, where we could, for lack of a better way to put it, could just geek out about this stuff and share what we knew, and listen to what other people knew. It was priceless. Our ability to do that. Um, Sometimes people say, "Do you miss the ranch?" And I'll say, "I miss the ranch, but I don't miss taking care of 126 acres of rural countryside. It was a lot of work." Well, but heck, both Vanessa and I were younger back then. It was, I mean, listen, we had a great run. It was a lot of fun. That being said, so because I live in Southeast Ohio and because things are considerably cheaper here, we bought the house where you and I are having this conversation right now. And then I'm on a hill overlooking the campus, and right down the road, another 5 acre plot of land popped up for, I don't even want to tell you how cheap it was because compared to what in rural areas ridiculous. It was like a gift. So we bought that, and that's where our mothership is for Fur Peace Productions. Like we have a video podcast which we're going to be shooting another episode this Thursday. I give lessons there. My wife's got her office there. Because I live in a rural area, we can afford to do a lot of fun stuff I couldn't do if I lived in a city. But the ranch is gone, but not forgotten. Now we used to have uh, this big wrought iron thing that the gate that went over the driveway to the ranch. Our driveway was almost half a mile long, and I took the gate with me when we sold the property. I've got the gates
Ah,
in the backyard of the new house.
that's great. That's great. Well, Yorma, as I mentioned, you're an inspiration, and we're honored to have you, and we're grateful that you gave us this time. Thank you so much for coming on Hard Rain and Pink Cadillacs.
Well, thanks for having me on, and I will tell you that I don't take it for granted that after all of these years that you guys still want to have a conversation with me. I appreciate it, and I like to talk, so it's all good.
Let me put a fine point on that for you. I was born in August of 1967, the summer of love.
Uh,
And by the time I was 17 years old, I grew up in Pittsburgh. And by the time I was 17 years old, in my head, I was living with you and Jerry and Bobby in the Haight-Ashbury in 1967. That's where I wanted to be.
I understand.
So I'm just a few years too late, obviously, but I do have the luxury of being able to look back on it
Yeah.
all, not in the same way that you can, in
Yeah.
a different way, but
Well,
it's fantastic.
it was an interesting time on so many levels, and You know, in a normal world, I'd be a great grandfather, but in this one, I have a 30-year-old son and a 19-year-old daughter. And when I talk to them, I go, look, I'm not saying that you missed all the good times, but I am saying that I don't see anything in the time of which they're growing up as passionately relevant as things were in San Francisco in that time.
Yeah. Well, and just let's put a fine point on that before we let you go. Was that completely cultural? Was it political? Was it why do you think in that moment, Stevie Van Zandt calls it a renaissance, a true
Yeah.
renaissance, that period? How do you define it and why it happened? Was it just because of Vietnam and the draft? What was going on?
I think I see it as a confluence of alternate realities. I mean, San Francisco has always been an interesting town on many levels. I think one of the things that I looked sort of romantically at was the Beat generation, which is the generation before us. That all seemed to be appealing to me on some level, but that's a good question. I mean, could it be ley lines to another universe? Who knows? But San Francisco, in that time, as a political entity, was incredibly conservative, but they allowed all this stuff to happen. I mean, it's very strange. I don't see, I mean, if something like that were to try to happen today, I don't see that happening in an urban environment in the United States today. Or
Yeah,
we don't need to jump in that down that rabbit hole, but I
I
just
hear
don't
you.
see. I mean, there's magical stuff happening. Don't get me wrong. It's not like
Yeah.
nothing good is ever going to happen again, because that's not the case. It certainly is, but to have something where that was like a citywide on some level, and on some levels a statewide. California was a very conservative state back in those days. Who knew? How could that possibly happen? You know, but it did.
Yeah, one big difference is that you can't rent an apartment for $80 a month anymore,
Boy,
and
that's for sure.
be a freelance musician for very long
Yeah.
without starving. So
Yeah, I mean, like we
that
said before, you know, San Francisco had that bohemian romantic atmosphere. If we all wanted to go there, it's a beautiful city, um, and it was a cheap place to live.
right.
And then they let us do all kinds of stuff. I mean, I was just looking at a shot recently over the last day or so. When we wanted to go do something in Golden Gate Park, we just went to Golden Gate Park, set up a flatbed truck with a PA, and people would show up. You go to jail for doing that today.
Yeah.
There's more of that in the Jim Marshall book. The interesting thing about some of those early photos, let's see if I can find one real quickly, is just how primitive the PA system
Oh,
was in the Panhandle in Golden Gate Park. There's a photo here where the speakers, the main speakers, look like garbage cans. I mean, they literally. I'm sorry that I'm not prepared enough to be able to just pull it up
yeah.
here, but I think I might be able to get it. Um, and you know, were you struggling? Did you know that it was sonically not where you wanted it to be, or was it just that it was what it was? And
Well, I think you know, the Dead hooking up with Owsley
yeah,
got them into.
you can
Yeah,
see
I mean
the garbage can
that's
speakers,
hilarious. Yeah, I mean really, what are
almost like
those
air raid
things?
sirens or
Yeah, and
something.
that's exactly what they look like. I mean, one can only imagine what it sounded like. You know, but people weren't as critical back in those days. You know, it was like, you know, I don't think we emphasize this enough, but being young really has a lot to do with all that stuff also. I mean, we weren't kids, but we were young, and it was just the whole everything. We just had no frame of reference to judge it by, you know. So I think if you could hear anything at all, it was a good thing.
Right,
I
right.
mean, today there'd be, you know, you'd have all these timeline speakers, and there'd be some geek going like, I think one of those Time Light speakers is out of time. So there's none of that nonsense, you know.
Right,
And
right.
I remember the Dead when Owsley was bankrolling them there for a while. They had a couple of those A7 voice of the theater speakers. I think
Hmm.
that was one of those things in the picture that you're showing there.
Hmm.
But it was like, I mean, that was like, wow, you got part of the movie theater sound system. That's unbelievable.
Right.
Hey, speaking of that, I just went to see Avatar the other day at one of those big fancy theaters up in Columbus. If you're going to go see it, I like movies like that. You got to go to the big theater with this whatever they call the surround sound stuff. It's awesome.
Right, right. That's a good recommendation.
Yeah.
Well, Yorma, thank you again for coming aboard. We're just thrilled to have you, and it's always an honor to talk to you.
Well, listen, anytime you want to gab, let me know, and I may have to stop by and hear what that Music Man amp sounds like
You're
sometime.
welcome anytime. You're welcome anytime. We'll play whatever you want. I'll back you up.
Good deal.
I got some
What
guitars here to
if
show
you're
you.
going to back me up, what would your choice of guitar be?
Well, look, to be perfectly honest with you, I, at the moment, am into a lot of these boutique guys that are
Yeah,
doing traditional builds, but
right,
adding sort of modern amenities or modern appointments to
right.
them. The guy that I'm most obsessed with is a guy out of Nashville, Tennessee, named Dennis Fano, Fano. And
Hmm.
Dennis has a company called Novo, Novo. It's novoguitars.com.
Hmm.
And these are his take on a traditional guitar, but man, they are amazing. I don't have one in the room here at the moment, or I'd show it to you, but novoguitars.com is where you can find them. And yeah, I think you would definitely enjoy
I'll
seeing
definitely
those
check
and
it
trying
out.
them out. Yeah,
Don't go
Novo.
away. Don't go away. I got some.
Okay.
Since we're showing, don't go away
All
here.
right.
I'll be
Okay.
right
Well,
back.
I can go get a Novo. I have it in the other room.
I'm not going far. So I've been
Oh, wow.
I've been
Yeah,
playing
look at
these.
that.
This is made by a guy named David Fleming. He's from Green, Iowa. So this is his take on a 1937 Gibson J35. And
Wow.
anyhow, so I like these J35 sounds guitars. So these are the things I've been playing on the regular gig. But because I'm a geeky guitar player, I had him build me. It's too complicated to get this one out of the guitar room. To build me his take on a J200 out of Brazilian.
Oh, wow. Oh, my
That's
goodness.
that's really
Wow.
something.
So the bottom end on that must be amazing.
Yeah, it's like on that big guitar when you play that B against that A,
Yeah.
it's like a cross between a lap dance and a high colonic. Anyway, we could go
Well,
on and on.
absolutely. Well, thank you again, Jorma. Jorma Kaukonen, it's always great to talk to you, and we're thrilled to have you.
Back at you, brother. Thanks.
All right,
Okay.
Jorma.
Well, like I said, when we were talking to him, an inspiring guy. He just turned 85 and he's, still out there doing it. What are your impressions?
Yeah, I mean, it was fascinating to hear him dig into those days when he was transitioning from being a sort of traditional country blues player to being, you know, the lead guitarist in Jefferson Airplane, and how it was different, but not that different, and how uh, the connection between he and Paul and the rhythm section worked, and how he was, you know, he and Bob Weir and Jerry were like, you know, colleagues in the same, uh, going through the same things at the same time, coming out of the same kind of background. So I thought that was fascinating.
Indeed. Well, thanks again to all of our supporters of Hard Rain and Pink Cadillacs, all of you who have signed up, and especially those of you who have opened your wallets and helped support this show with a few dollars. We appreciate that. And we will see you next time on Hard Rain and Pink Cadillacs. Okay.